Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, joined, as always, by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. And Nate, we made it. It's Christmas week. The NFL Draft is 2 days away as we record this. I cannot be more excited. It's my favorite time of the year. So how are you doing as we head into the 2025 NFL Draft?
I am doing well. I've reached the point of can the draft just be here now? I've done my prep. I'm ready to go. I've made sure everything is fine. I did my internal systems of making sure everything was running, and I already have Cam Ward on the Titans, so it's ready to go there. Already having dreams about it of the draft not going how I expect it to go, so I am all ready.
Yeah, no, it's been it's going to be a few more days of prep here, basically, and just waiting as patiently as we possibly can. But yeah, as much as dreams might play a part in playing tricks on us, I don't think Cam Ward not going first overall is going to change here. Like he's seems to be locked in. I know there was news this morning coming out of the Titans informing him that he was going to be their first overall pick. He's like minus 20,000 betting odds or something yesterday to go first overall. So it is as much of a lock as it could possibly be. But yeah, speaking of the NFL draft and draft picks and draft order, we have a fun one today because we'll be running through our own NFL mock draft. Last week we did a rookie fantasy mock draft, obviously for fantasy purposes, but this week we're doing a full first round NFL draft and making the picks that make sense to us from an NFL standpoint while providing fantasy analysis for each pick, since this is a fantasy football podcast after all. Which, speaking of which, actually, if you love fantasy football, which of course you do if you're listening to this episode, and you love winning your leagues, listen up, because right now you can get 25% off an annual PFF Plus membership. This is not a drill, as they say. You'll get full access to the 2025 NFL Draft Guide with detailed reports on hundreds of prospects, complete with scheme fits and player comps to help you prep for your drafts. And beyond the Draft Guide, PFF Plus includes advanced tools and insights trusted by all 32 NFL teams, perfect for building and managing winning fantasy rosters. So head to subscribe.pff.com and use the code DRAFT25 to get 25% off. Again, that's subscribe.pff.com, code DRAFT25. You will thank me after your championship run. So, Nate, I'm looking forward to getting into it here. We had kind of run through this already before to make sure that we had our picks in line and we weren't wasting any time coming up with the picks in the episode here, and also to get this out in article form, which will be out on the site here shortly. But I was in charge of the odd number picks. You were in charge of the even number picks. So I got to kick things off here with maybe the most obvious and easy pick of the mock draft, like we've been saying. That is Cam Ward to the Tennessee Titans at first overall. So again, this one has kind of felt like a lock for a while now. Again, the Vegas odds are insanely favored to Cam Ward going first overall. I don't think you'll see any mock drafts this week that don't have Cam Ward going first overall. So for the Titans, that hopefully means that they're getting their quarterback of the future here. I mean, I obviously have my doubts about Ward as an NFL prospect, which has me kind of tempering expectations on him just a bit for fantasy, to the point where I probably still don't love him even as like 102 in super flex formats, but he's kind of like an average passer coming out of college by kind of all our key metrics for quarterbacks. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done there than most past top 5 quarterbacks. And then as a runner, like, he does run well when he chooses to take off. He's just not doing it nearly as much as we would want to kind of make up for that lack of like high end passing ability, right? So he averaged just 4.7 rush attempts per game during his college career, which isn't a high number. Like, for context, Bo Nix, who's an above average runner for the position, he was averaging 6.2 rush attempts per game. So Ward isn't that, high level dual threat quarterback, and the Tennessee Titans aren't exactly the most fantasy friendly offense for him to step into, like with Caleb Williams, for example, last year, like what he was set up with. And then he struggled to get it going as a rookie, like as a much better prospect as well. So I have my concerns. I don't think he'll be amazing for fantasy with the Titans, but that doesn't mean it's impossible either. So we'll hope for the best here for Cam Ward going first overall.
Oh yeah, like agree on Ward. I don't even think he'll be drafted in redraft leagues for the most part because you either need that supporting cast or you need the rushing. And for those of you watching, we've got our mock draft simulator up. You can see the team needs for each team. Number one is quarterback, number two is wide receiver for the Titans. And so Ward's not gonna have the best supporting cast around him compared to other quarterbacks. But I've got the number two pick here with Cleveland. I didn't put too much thought into this. I'm just going Travis Hunter. I think he's the best available prospect. I think he fits well with the Browns, and I think with Cleveland, this should be a decent enough spot for his fantasy value because they have been pretty adamant that he's going to be a wide receiver first, cornerback second. It doesn't sound like they're going to really try restricting him to one position. I think it's just starting him at wide receiver, having him learn the playbook there before having him learn the playbook at cornerback. I think he'll play both if he gets drafted by Cleveland. But Cleveland is one of the teams that needs a wide receiver most of all. Jared Judy's their best wide receiver. If you were to rank all of the number one wide receivers in the league, he's probably near the bottom of the list in terms of number two wide receivers. Right now, it's Cedric Tillman. So Hunter, I think, would have a ton of targets in Cleveland, even if he's only playing maybe 70% of the offensive snaps. I could still see him leading the team in targets. So even though it might not be the best quarterback situation, might not be an offense that's scoring a lot of points, I think Hunter would be able to make up for that early on in his career with target volume. And then hopefully later down in his career, he'd have a more stable quarterback situation and that stuff too. So I think this is a pretty positive landing spot for Hunter. I have seen talk of maybe Cleveland will trade down and then someone trades up for Hunter and then who knows what happens. But for our mock, we are putting Hunter on the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I think that what was that this morning, Schefter. I think it was. It might have been
Peter
Schefter.
Schrager, I think, was
Traeger, that's who it was.
reporting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, saying that they're fielding offers, but yeah, I mean, it just makes sense at this point. Like even Daniel Jeremiah was saying like that this one appears to be kind of a lock as well. That we as we expected here, but like that I think he used the terms like he'll major in offense and minor in defense, which is kind of the ideal scenario, like you said, for fantasy, considering that we know he's going to play both sides of the ball regardless of where he lands. So getting more work at wide receiver really helps his fantasy potential. So he's pretty much like 102 for me in all formats, I think, with this landing spot. So I'd be pretty excited about Travis Hunter to the Browns here. Okay, so number three, this one was an interesting one for me because I have the Giants who they have much greater needs than edge defender. But I also believe that Kayvon Thibodeau has not lived up to his top five potential over the first 3 years of his career. So I am going Abdul Carter here out of Penn State. And, for the Giants, like even Thibodeau, like up until last year, he wasn't even close to that level, like that top five level. When you look at his kind of underlying metrics, he was just really poor at the position. Not to say that he can't get there, but if you're the Giants, I think you can't help but feel a little disappointed. And I don't think Kayvon Thibodeau's presence necessarily stops the opportunity to grab like a blue chip prospect like Abdul Carter to add to their defensive line. It makes Thibodeau an expendable trade asset as well that they could potentially get a decent return for still in his rookie contract, or just utilize him, Abdul Carter, and Brian Burns as kind of like a three-headed monster off the edge, along with Dexter Lawrence in the middle. Like either way, Carter is a hell of a prospect. And while it's not like the most ideal path to snaps for him, like for IDP purposes, I think, our IDP dynasty rosters still kind of need to treat Carter as the non-Travis Hunter IDP 101 because he can and will take over a larger role sooner rather than later. He's that good. So I'd be still excited about Abdul Carter to the Giants here.
Oh yeah, if I had third, I'd go Carter. Just get the best player available for the Giants. With the Patriots at 4, I think there's a number of ways that they could go. I don't think Ashton Jeanty is out of the question at running back there. I think it's probably a little early for them to pick a wide receiver. I could very well see a team trading up potentially for someone like Jeanty in this spot, but I will make the pick for the Patriots here, and I'm going to go Will Campbell, offensive tackle out of LSU. The Patriots' offensive line was just a mess last year. They were bottom 3 in terms of run block grade, bottom 3 in terms of pass block grade. They did bring in a couple of veterans over the course of the offseason, but I don't think that'll stop them from continuing to improve the offensive line. I think they'll go offense here just because they have Drake May at quarterback and they need to build around him. So giving giving him an offensive tackle to help make his life a little bit easier, I think makes a lot of sense, unless they can trade back and pick up a couple more picks, which I think that's very possible here at the fourth pick.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think this has become like a pretty popular pick here as well. Like, I think it makes a lot of sense for New England. If they're going to stay put here, like Vidarian Lowe cannot be Drake May's starting left tackle this season. They need to upgrade here, and they can come back and address wide receiver, something like that in the second round. So I like the pick here for the Patriots, which puts the Jaguars on the clock for me. So I guess kind of continuing with the chalk picks here for now, because Mason Graham is another one of like the betting favorites to go to the Jaguars at 5. Although that has kind of shifted a little bit in the last couple days here. There's been a couple more players in the mix, including Ashton Genty and even Tet McMillan. So, but for me, like, they are very thin in the middle of that defensive line, and they don't have any real star power there to kind of collapse the pocket for guys like Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker, who they play a ton off the edge. But I think drafting Graham now gives them someone that they could play a ton in the middle as well, because he can contribute as a high-end run defender and pass rusher. That is going to be very valuable for that defense that has kind of lacked that type of talent since pretty much the year that Josh Hines Allen was drafted in 2019, when Calais Campbell was there. So like, since then, there has been nobody of that level. So this could be a really nice combination of need and talent for the Jags, who need all the help they can get. And for IDP, like, he has the potential, to be a top 5 option for his position in DT required dynasty leagues as well. And someone who I think we should be coveting in those formats as a future star interior defensive lineman, Mason Graham going to the Jaguars. That's where I went.
There, I do think it's a real possibility that Genty goes there. Schefter, I believe, had an article in the past day listing some players who could get traded, and ETN was among those players. So even if it's not Genty with this first round pick, I wouldn't be surprised if their early second round pick is used on a running back. But since you aren't going Genty at 5, I will go Genty at 6. Put him on the Raiders. It's a very nice combination of the Raiders filling their biggest need, as well as being able to pick the best available player. So best of both worlds there. Genty, I think this would be a decent landing spot for his fantasy value. I don't think it's the absolute best spot. I think in terms of volume of touches, this would give him an opportunity to touch the ball a ton every single game. But the offensive line isn't quite as good as some of the other potential landing spots, and just the offense in general. Defenses would be able to focus a lot on Genty. They might not be scoring a ton of points. So there might be some slightly better fantasy landing spots for Genty, but this is still a spot where he would be the clear starter, a potential top 10 fantasy running back, at least a first or second round pick in redraft, and still the clear first overall pick in dynasty rookie drafts and dynasty superflex rookie drafts.
Yeah, no, I actually really like this landing spot for him. Like, I know, like you said, like, the offense itself, that situation isn't perfect for him, but like, I mean, the amount of touches that I think he would get in that Raiders offense, give a player of that talent that many touches, I think is just going to create monster production numbers regardless. And yeah, it's Sincere McCormick, it's Raheem Mostert. Like, those are kind of the guys that they have right now. I don't think there's any threat at all for them stealing touches or significant touches from Ashton Genty. So I'd be all in here. I would love to pick. Obviously, he's not really changing as RB1 or 101 overall for our rookie drafts anyways, regardless of where he goes. But yeah, I still really like the landing spot for the Raiders.
For me, it's just knowing the Bears are still a potential landing spot.
Yeah.
Dreaming of him in front of that or behind that offensive line with Ben Johnson's offense. That's the only thing that, like, the Raiders are a step below that, even though this would still be perfectly fine for Genty.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, it'll be interesting, right? Like, I mean, there's this whole Jacksonville thing, about them potentially taking Genty, and some people believe that it's maybe some smoke to get somebody to trade up ahead of the Raiders to take Ashton Genty. I feel like that's the only way that the Raiders don't end up with Genty at this point, and maybe that he does get to Chicago. But yeah, it's an interesting spot for sure. I don't know how Chicago gets him. If I don't know that I would trade up to the top 5 to take a running back, but it would definitely be a really nice landing spot for him if he does get to Chicago. So I'm up on the clock here at number 7 for the New York Jets. And I thought about this one for a second. And honestly, I don't know that Tyler Warren is necessarily like the Jets' top option on their board here, because I think they might be looking at other positions, but at the same time, like, this is a little bit of kind of what I would do here. And I think this works really well for fantasy, because Tyler Warren to the Jets, he'd be no worse than the second option in the passing game on a weekly basis. He's kind of that, low average depth of target, quarterback friendly target that Justin Fields needs to deliver. Like, we saw Justin Fields allow Pat Fryermuth to operate as a top 8 option last year in his short stint with the Steelers, right? So Tyler Warren, obviously a much better prospect and weapon than Fryermuth, and no disrespect to Fryermuth, he's a very good NFL tight end. So I just think, Tyler Warren in that offense would be significantly better. So I'd be jazzed about this landing spot here for fantasy, and would think that we see, regular top 6 finishes for the position from Warren in this spot, assuming Justin Fields isn't a complete disaster, which I think he could be capable.
Yeah, like Warren, I think out of all of the rookies, I might be least concerned about his landing spot, because he's just going to be an every down tight end wherever he goes, catching short passes and doing a lot after the catch, and he can do that with any quarterback. So I think 7 to the Jets is just fine landing spot for Warren. But I kind of wanted him at 8 for the Panthers. We kind of had a thing going where I was picking offensive players and you were picking defensive players, and now that's out the window. So I'm probably going to have to go with a defensive player. I'm going with Jalen Walker here. The only thing is, I think the Panthers are a team that could be trading down. I think this spot makes a lot of sense. Armand Membu, I think, is the best available player at this spot at offensive tackle, and I think there are a couple of teams in these next few picks that could want him. I think if Carolina is not going edge defender, they could go wide receiver, and I think as long as they stay ahead of Dallas, they can get whichever remaining wide receiver they want. But going with an edge defender, going with Walker here, just I think it's a clear need for the Panthers. One of the worst teams in terms of pass rush grade this past season. I know he is someone who has done decently in terms of pass rushing. It hasn't been always what he's done. He's done a lot of going back in coverage as well in college. So I think we could see a little bit of that in the NFL. I'm not sure that's going to be the best thing for his IDP value, but I think he should be a player who's on the field all the time for Carolina, at least help their defense, even if he's not the best IDP option.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think this one, starting to feel a little bit like a lock as well, as far as, if the Panthers do stay here, like, they could probably deploy him, like you said, in that kind of Frankie Louvu-esque role, though I do think he, probably more as an edge. I think he's way too kind of raw to be an off-ball linebacker in a full-time role and do a good job of it. So I think just letting him rush the passer to start his career, get a little bit of experience here and there at off-ball linebacker if they really want him there. But I don't think he's necessarily like a reliable option to kind of start his career as an off-ball linebacker with anything more than like 40% of snaps per week. So it'll be much better deployed as a rushing the passer, because he wasn't awful there. But yeah, I'm with you. For IDP purposes, not as exciting. I don't think he'll be the consistent, starter that we would want in our lineups. Okay, so the Saints are up at 9, and I do believe there's like maybe some like Michael Williams interest here. But man, I can't help but feel like that's a massive reach for a team that is not really in a position to make those types of gambles at this point, especially, with Derek Carr. Like, he might not play this year. So I think they need to start over, really kind of build it from the ground up. I think Shedeur Sanders is the pick for me here. Like, I don't think they have a roster that they're necessarily going to be able to, pull up from the bootstraps in order to kind of legitimately compete in the playoffs. Like, even if they do magically sneak in, I think they need to be realistic here. I think, jump starting that potentially by taking Sanders at least gives ticket holders reasons for optimism in the meantime, and at the very least something to tune in for and garner interest. Whether Sanders becomes something in the NFL, who knows? But he's an accurate quarterback. He's athletically gifted, so there's talent there to unlock and translate to the next level. He gets to keep his Colorado color scheme as well, so that's kind of cool. But I think I like this spot for him if I'm the Saints. And for fantasy purposes, again, not necessarily, in love with any of the quarterbacks in this year's class, but I think, gives him opportunity right away, especially with the Derek Carr surgery and injury and stuff like that. I think there's potential here. So, yeah, even if it's starting to feel a little bit more unlikely, I'm going to go with Shedeur Sanders to the Saints.
Yeah, I think if this does happen, there's at least a chance Sanders has more fantasy value than Ward initially, just because of the Saints landing spot. Having Chris Olave at wide receiver, having Rashid Shaheed at wide receiver, that's a step up from what Ward will have with Tennessee. And kind of looking at a lot of the former first overall picks, a lot of them failed to finish as a top 18 fantasy quarterback as a rookie. I think Kyler Murray is the one exception over the past decade or so. And that's because that first overall pick, that landing spot, typically isn't great because that's a team with the worst record, barring a trade. So Sanders going to a team like the Saints, who have won a decent number of games basically each of the past couple years, even though it's not a great record, they have weapons around Sanders. So there is a chance that Sanders would be the best rookie quarterback, at least initially, if he lands with the Saints.
Yep, definitely possible. He's got some decent weapons there, and I mean, not to mention our waiver wire poster boy, Taysom Hill, if he's back healthy as well, so that helps.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
All right. What did you do at 10 here, Nate? Because
at
Chicago
10
would
with
be
the
on the clock.
Bears, yeah, decided to trading back with the Miami Dolphins. The reason I want to trade Chicago back is I think the biggest needs, as shown here, are running back and defensive line. And I think it's too early to draft either one of those positions here. I think in terms of defensive line, there's a couple of different players that they could get. So if they wanted a defensive lineman, they could trade back and get one. If they wanted a running back, I think they could trade back and get one. And like I mentioned, at the 8 spot, Membu is probably the top player available. And I don't think they need an offensive tackle. I've seen them mock Membu a number of times, but I really like what they have at offensive tackle with Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright, both graded above 75 last year, two of the highest graded young tackles in the league. So I don't think they need to go Membu. So I'm trading the pick to the Dolphins, trading 13 and 116 for the 10th pick and getting Membu to the Dolphins. With Terran Armstead retiring, I think there's a need at offensive tackle. I know they drafted one in the second round last year who didn't grade particularly well in his limited opportunities last year, so I don't think that should necessarily stop them from trying to improve their offensive line. I think offense is still a strength for the team, and I think losing Armstead, who was their highest graded offensive player last year, will hurt. And I think if they bring in Membu, it'll help alleviate some of that pain of losing Armstead.
Yeah, I like this call. Makes sense to me. So for me, I am up next with the San Francisco 49ers at 11. So I went with cornerback Jahdae Barron out of Texas. And I mean, for this one, like Charvarius Ward, he left this offseason. He's been a starter for them for 3 years. He dealt with the personal loss, obviously, this past year and needed the change of scenery. So definitely unfortunate, like for the 49ers from a roster perspective, because he was such an important piece to that defense. But I think getting a cornerback, Jahdae Barron, in this spot would help kind of alleviate a lot of those concerns. He's also versatile enough to kind of line up anywhere in the secondary as well. So he should see the field quite a bit and allow Saleh to, be flexible in how he deploys them, which I like for the 49ers a fair bit. For fantasy purposes, IDP, we're really not drafting rookie cornerbacks. We can, if we want, this probably be the top one. But late in rookie drafts would be the spot, because I do think he'll get on the field and we'll find ways to be productive. But at such a deep position, we don't need to be spending rookie capital on corners.
That's fair. I'll jump right to the Cowboys pick, and kind of excited for this one. T-Mac, I will go to the Cowboys. I think a lot of mock drafts right now have a wide receiver going to Dallas, which makes a lot of sense. They lost Brandon Cooks. They didn't really bring in anyone to replace him. They haven't had any wide receiver over 100, 700 yards outside of CeeDee Lamb over these past couple seasons. So I think they really need a wide receiver. So it's between T-Mac and I think Matthew Golden. And we both have talked before on the podcast about how we like McMillan better than Golden in general, but also what these two wide receivers do differently. I think T-Mac better fits what Dallas can need, and I think better complements CeeDee Lamb. Lamb has generally played better in the slot or when playing off the line of scrimmage. Even though he has experience playing X receiver, he is still graded better at the other wide receiver spots, where T-Mac is a clear X wide receiver. So I think what they do is different enough, and they can complement each other, and he would be the clear number 2 wide receiver in Dallas, received plenty of playing time as a rookie. I think could very well be the number 2 player in targets in Dallas. It'll just be how good is this Cowboys offense doing in general, and that would determine his immediate fantasy value. With the offensive line, with Dak Prescott's injury history, and now at this point his age, not quite optimistic about how good this Cowboys offense can be. But we've seen Dak Prescott at his best do very, very well, in which case McMillan could very well be a fantasy starter as a rookie, and just kind of dependent on what happens with Travis Hunter, could be the top wide receiver in dynasty classes FE's picked here.
Yeah, I like the spot. I was tempted to go Ted McMillan when I was picking for Jacksonville, but if it's not that early, like I think Dallas is kind of the perfect fit. I was looking at ideal fantasy landing spots. I wrote up an article for that this week, and Ted McMillan to the Dallas Cowboys was my pick as well. Like I think Ted McMillan and CeeDee Lamb can coexist in that offense. Like we've seen, obviously wide receiver 2 in Dallas hasn't really been overly fantasy friendly recently. I think it was Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup kind of shared a little bit of a role on the outside a couple years ago, and then Cavante Turpin and Jalen Tolbert last year, right? But both of those guys, the both of those duos, I should say, combined for over 1,000 receiving yards just playing on the outside alone last year in Dallas. So I think, considering the profile for McMillan, I think he can play that role full time, take over that spot. I could definitely see the potential for 1,000-yard season from him if Dak Prescott is healthy and Dak Prescott is back to passing at a strong enough rate to get there. But I think that's possible here for the Cowboys, for CeeDee Lamb and McMillan to all kind of thrive in that offense. So I like it. Which puts me on the clock here for the Chicago Bears, who traded back, obviously, with Miami. So I went with another cornerback here for the Bears. I went Will Johnson out of Michigan. So the reason that I went with Will Johnson, I don't think the Bears liked what they got from Tyreek Stevenson last season, especially after that kind of debacle against the Commanders on that Hail Mary. They were keeping him from kind of being a full-time starter there for a little bit, and keeping him in more of a rotational role before they had really no choice but to kind of put him back to being a starter. But if they get Will Johnson here, they don't have to worry about Stevenson as their CB2 across from Jalen Johnson anymore. So I would be happy with this if I'm the Bears for sure.
I'll move right along to the Colts and do the same thing that basically every mock draft is doing and give the Colts a tight end. We'll go with Colston Loveland here out of Michigan, tight end. The only thoughts that I have that they might not pick him is they sounded like they really want a tight end who can play on every down, and either they think Loveland can do that or they might pass on him if they don't think he can do that. I think his college profile, everything we've seen statistically, kind of matches up with all the other great young tight ends that we've seen the last couple seasons. So I think this guy is the limit for Loveland. And I think it's worth noting, even though the Colts haven't thrown a ton to tight ends these past couple years, I don't think that would stop them from throwing a lot to Loveland. We've seen plenty of times where a team doesn't have a tight end and all of a sudden they do have a tight end, and all of a sudden their tight end starts getting targets. We saw the same thing out of the Raiders last year, where they weren't throwing the ball to a tight end before they got Brock Bowers, and then they got Brock Bowers and he led the team. So, especially with the Colts wide receiver group, they have a bunch of guys who are more or less wide receiver 2s. I don't think they have a clear top wide receiver option, but they have a lot of good guys in that group. There's at least a chance Loveland could lead the team in targets as a rookie in this landing spot.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, like you said, it's a highly mocked position to the Colts. It's been a minute since we got consistent fantasy tight end out of Indy, because they love rotating those guys. I don't think Loveland is a rotation guy. Certainly not if you're taking him 14th overall, right? So he'd be a fantasy tight end 1, maybe not as high of a ceiling as like Tyler Warren, like if Anthony Richardson continues to struggle, I guess. But I think still a very good option who can return starting value for us on a weekly basis. I feel like we're all very hopeful of a tight end going to Indy, like a Tyler Warren or a Colston Loveland, in the first round. I would like to see it happen, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they go a different route, especially if Tyler Warren isn't available. But yeah, we'll see. I think it could be an interesting spot. All right, so the Falcons are up next, and I'm going with Mike Green, edge rusher out of Marshall. They have been in desperate need of an impact edge rusher for a while now. They've taken swings outside of round one, and it hasn't quite worked out. They need to finally address that position, I think, early on here and get a more pro-ready pass rusher like a Mike Green out of Marshall. I understand, that there will be teams that have Shamar Stewart and or Michael Williams higher on their boards, but I don't think either of those guys are as close to being as polished as Green, and figure to be kind of more long-term projects, which Atlanta doesn't really need right now. I think they need somebody that can make an impact a lot sooner. So I think he does have a better shot of hitting the ground running. He boasts high-end pass rush metrics and run defense grades to kind of play that volume heavy role, put up strong production for them, and definitely be a viable IDP option as well. If this was the spot for Green, he'd be second only to Abdul Carter for me in the IDP rookie edge rankings. He already is that, but this would kind of solidify it for me and be a really nice opportunity for him to be productive early and often in his career.
There, even though I definitely think they will go defense, and they've made it very clear based on their visits and all that stuff that defense is the priority. I do think Atlanta would be an interesting landing spot for one of these top wide receivers, because Drake London's a clear top one on the team, and even though they have Darnell Mooney, I could see one of these rookies being the number 2 player in targets on the team. Michael Penix looked very good as a rookie and has very limited opportunities, so I think this has a chance to be a very high scoring offense. So out of all the landing spots for where these rookie wide receivers could go, I don't think Atlanta will pull the trigger on one here at 15, but if they do, I think that would be one of the more ideal landing spots for one of the wide receivers.
Yeah.
I've got the 16th pick with the Arizona Cardinals. I do think there are a ton of different directions that they could go. That includes trading back, because there are so many different players that kind of make sense to go to Arizona, but I'm also not sure there are any teams that are really looking to trade up at this point. So while I wouldn't be surprised if there was a trade, when John and I were talking about potential trades of what could happen here, none of them were really working out. So going to pull the trigger on a pick for the Cardinals here, and I'll go Kelvin Banks, offensive lineman out of Texas. Even though the Cardinals, I don't think the offensive line is the biggest need for Arizona. They kind of had a nice mismatch of players, kind of journeyman guys composed the offensive line last year. They ended up having, I think, 8 or so different players see significant playing time, but they ended up in general as a unit grading well. But just because they haven't really invested much in the offensive line in the draft in recent years, they spent 1 first-round pick recently, but outside of that, it's mostly been journeyman free agents that have composed the line. So bringing in a player who can be part of this line for several years to come, was playing offensive tackle, but I wouldn't be surprised if he would be playing guard for Arizona. Player that's only allowed 12 pressures or less in each of the past 3 years, so very good in pass protection, but I think someone who can play guard as well and potentially be a starter for the team and just help the offense in general.
I like it. All right, before we go through with our second half of the first round here, I do want to let everybody know that this podcast is sponsored by Fabric by Gerber Life. The new year is a great time to reevaluate financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids. Now is the perfect time to make sure your kids are on a path toward a solid financial future. A kid's investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life is quick and simple to set up and lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, and more. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With the kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf now, giving their investments more time to grow. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything benefiting your child, from tuition and tutors to music classes, and when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy. fabric.com/fantasy, MEET fabric.com/fantasy. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investments subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, so I am up next here with the 17th pick, the Cincinnati Bengals. So I went with Josh Simmons, offensive tackle out of Ohio State. I think the Bengals are probably potentially looking at defense here as well, but I want Joe Burrow protected first. And I think there are some solid defensive options that they can get on day two that can still be impactful, where I don't necessarily have that confidence for offensive line. So Josh Simmons, he is coming off an injury in 2024, so he might not be ready right away. And I think that's okay, because the Bengals, they do have Orlando Brown Jr. and Amarius Mims as well. So Simmons could kind of take some time, get healthy, and develop. And at the very least, if Brown or Mims goes down, it's not a complete catastrophe at the position where, Burrow's getting killed every other play. So I'm personally going to go offensive line. I know they just invested a ton of money in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but if Burrow isn't upright, then, getting them the ball becomes much harder to do, obviously. So this is where I'm going first for Cincy.
There, and that leads me to the Seahawks at 18, and these last two picks have probably been kind of a worst case scenario for the Seahawks, because I definitely think they would want to go offensive linemen, and then we just took two offensive linemen with the last two picks. I do think it's a little too early to get any of the other offensive linemen. I think ideally, again, this would be a trade down situation. But again, I'm not sure there's anyone really looking to trade up to this spot. So because of that, kind of forced to make a pick here. So going with one of the best available players, Malachi Stark, safety out of Georgia, is the one that I went with. I think if there's anyone that trades up here, it's someone who wants a safety or a linebacker, just because I don't think there's a lot of high-end talent, and I think this is one of the few options that exist at safety here. I think his run defense grade has been pretty good, so that should help his fantasy value. He's had a tackle grade and run defensive grade above 84 each of the last two seasons, and I know he was tied for the top safety prospect in your prospect model article earlier this offseason, so I think there's a chance that this could be decent for him in terms of IDP value, but I'd like to know your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I like the spot for IDP. I think it creates that, full-time starting opportunity for Starks, which is what we really want for these highly drafted safeties. I don't think he's, necessarily going to get like the prime IDP alignments closer to the line of scrimmage over someone like Julian Love, but that's not really his game anyway. So just being a full-time starter, getting that opportunity, I think is the biggest thing for Starks. And this wouldn't really take him out of that top two IDP rookie safety conversation either, in my opinion. So yeah, like the spot for Starks and like the fit as well. So I'm on the clock here at 19, and honestly, I was between Malachi Starks and Jihad Campbell for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers pick. So I'm glad you made it easier for me. I think the defense is the play for Tampa Bay in round one, whether it's another edge rusher or a safety next to Antoine Winfield Jr. Or a linebacker of the future here in Jihad Campbell. So Levante David, one of the best of his generation, but he's on the brink of retirement seemingly for the past couple off seasons. He's been signing kind of these one-year deals with Tampa Bay to kind of keep going. But even with David there, I think the next best option they have is Anthony Walker, who is a solid vet, but also not like, a long-term option for them. And I think for a team that has a history of strong linebacker play, I think they'd want to ensure that continues by taking the top linebacker in this class. And Campbell, I think, would fit well into Todd Bowles' scheme as well, a player who can blitz effectively, as he did this past year at Alabama, where he put up 8 sacks and 20 pressures on 99 pass rush attempts. We see that, quite a bit out of these Bucs linebackers under Todd Bowles. So it would be an easy transition for Campbell, while also, kind of being able to thrive in like typical off-ball linebacker duties, racking up tackles and playing a full-time role, because this has been historically a two linebacker defense, even though last year they didn't have the bodies to necessarily do that. So there was a little bit more rotating, but I think Campbell would get them back on that track, and he'd remain a top rookie IDP option for me with this draft capital and landing spot for sure.
There, that leads me to the Broncos at 20, and I would not be at all surprised when I do my winners and losers article after day one of the draft that whoever the Broncos pick here will be on the winner spot because they have a good offense with Bo Nix, but they also have a need at running back and at wide receiver. I ended up going running back here, going with Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. Broncos have a clear need at running back. We're one of the lowest rushing graded teams last season. Lost Javonte Williams in free agency, haven't brought in anyone else. I know there are other running backs in this class that might resemble Alvin Kamara a little bit more. And with Kamara's history with Sean Payton, there might be some running backs that seem like better fits. But I think the Broncos have a versatile enough scheme that they would be able to adjust their offense pretty seamlessly to match Omari and Hampton's strengths. I don't think that's a problem that Hampton isn't exactly like one of Sean Payton's past running backs. I think Hampton, this would be a great landing spot for him. I think he'd have a ton of fantasy value. I think pretty clear top 15 or so in redraft leagues in terms of running backs, just because we're going to end up with so many backfields that look more like committees, where I think the Broncos, if they pick Hampton here, would be one of the few teams remaining that have a clear lead running back, and that would be Hampton. So I think this would be great for his fantasy value. I think it would be great for the Broncos and their offense in general. I do think there's a chance that they go wide receiver here, in which case this might be the best landing spot for any of these rookie wide receivers, just because they have Cortland Sutton and kind of a rotation of guys, but a chance that any wide receiver they pick could end up being the top wide receiver on the team as early as their rookie season, catching passes from a good quarterback.
Yeah, I like it. I wrote up again the ideal landing spots for this year's like skill position rookies, and Hampton to Denver was my fit there as well. He has great size and a skill set that I think Sean Payton like he's kind of been looking for, and like even though he's not this amazing receiving threat out of the backfield, I don't think it would take all that much for him to get there, right? Like I mean, we saw Javonte Williams rank top 5 among rookie running back or among all running backs last year in targets last season. So I don't think Payton would be adverse to put Hampton out there on passing downs, even if it's not, that he's the primary receiving back. Like I think he'll get some snaps there and would likely be utilized efficiently when that happens. So I'd love this spot for Hampton for sure. All right. So I have the Pittsburgh Steelers here at 21. Now the noise, I think of Jackson Dart going round 1 seems to be legit at this point. Like I fully expect him to kind of get in there. And I don't think any team makes more sense than the Pittsburgh Steelers, considering how this draft has fallen. Like, I think, if the Saints do pass on Shedeur Sanders, then Shedeur Sanders could potentially be in play here, but he's off the board for us right now. So I think the Steelers, who are desperate for a quarterback, I think the Aaron Rodgers shenanigans are not going to be a fit here for Mike Tomlin and company. So, they're also not going to go into the season with Mason Rudolph as their QB1, because if that's the case, then they may as well just kind of burn it down and start over. But there's just too many pieces for them to do that right now. So pushing, to compete, I think still makes sense for them, especially after trading for DK Metcalf. They still have George Pickens on a rookie contract. Have to imagine that, they're going to add a quality running back at some point in this draft as well. And that defense is obviously still loaded with talent. So having this big hole at quarterback like just doesn't make sense. I think they'll take Dart. He'll start right away, potentially as a really decent fantasy option, considering he has some rushing upside to his game, and a lot of his passing metrics point to one of, if not the best passer in this class. So I would say let's make this happen, assuming that Shedeur Sanders isn't an option for them. But I think even if that's possible, I think it's not impossible that the Steelers have Dart over Sanders anyway. So that's where I'm going.
I think that's fair, and I think if that does happen, Dart ends up with the Steelers, Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign there, and he ends up being the starter. He, again, could be the best fantasy option because of the rushing, like you said. I think he'd have the most rushing out of the 3 quarterbacks we talked about. I'd throw in there Jalen Milroe. I don't think he'll go first round to the Steelers, but if he ends up going to the Steelers maybe in the second round, or even the Saints in the second round, and ends up being their starting quarterback, Milroe might be the one that has the most fantasy value out of all the quarterbacks, because I think Milroe would be rushing even more than Dart. So, in terms of his rushing grade, has been one of the best quarterbacks we've seen in terms of how often he was rushing, in terms of his tracking metrics, his speed, all of that point to a great rushing quarterback, even if he's not the best passer. So, even though we talked about Dart here, I just want to throw out there Milroe, if he ends up being a starter in the NFL this year, I would probably put him as my top fantasy quarterback.
Thanks.
I've got the Chargers with the next pick at 22. I'm going to go with Michael Williams out of Georgia. Edge rusher there. They just lost Joey Bosa. They did re-sign Khalil Mack, but Mack is 34 years old now, I believe, almost has 10,000 offensive snaps. Williams, someone who's a bit more of a good player against the run, more so than the pass, so might not be the best IDP option because of that and the lack of pass rushing. But I think having him with the Chargers, someone who can learn from Khalil Mack and eventually be their top edge defender there. So maybe not the best in terms of IDP value, but still someone who can help the Chargers out.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I have a hard time imagining Michael Williams being like an immediate IDP option, regardless of where he lands. Anyways, like I think he is very much a project at the next level, anyways. So I don't mind this spot. Like Tuli Tuipulotu, he's been productive, but he's not like an every down threat. And like you said, Khalil Mack is an expensive veteran, so there's going to be a need to kind of replenish there a little bit. And I think Michael Williams would definitely be in play. Okay, so I am the Green Bay Packers at 23. We recently did our all analyst, our all PFF analyst 7-round mock draft, which you can check out now on PFF.com. And I was in charge of picking for the Packers. I don't know why Green Bay was assigned to me and not you, Nate, since you're the Packers fan here. But here we are. And the pick I made for that piece is the same pick that I'll make here, and that is Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. Super athletic prospect. I believe he scored a perfect 10 relative athletic score, and we know how much the NFL loves their uber athletes, regardless of the lack of polish as pass rushers. And the Packers are no exception to that. This is the same team that invested heavily in Rashawn Gary, who was also an ultra athletic pass rusher project, and he's worked out to an extent and has been an effective piece for them. So this could be the perfect spot for kind of Stewart to learn and grow for them, making kind of an impact all along the defensive line as he gets his opportunity. So another guy that might not be a year one or maybe even a year two like full-time player, because he needs that time to develop still. And the Packers, they have a former first rounder, Lucas Van Ness. They also have Kingsley Enagbare, who they relied on a lot last year and seemed to like, and of course Rashawn Gary. So even in the interior, because Shamar Stewart is versatile, he plays on the inside a little bit. They have guys like Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, who are high quality players still. So Stewart, starts out as depth, but he could deliver on that high end upside over time by just not throwing him right into the deep end and giving him some time to develop.
So I've got their division rival, the Vikings, at 24. I think there are a number of things that the Vikings could do. I could see them trading down as well. But I'm going to go wide receiver Matthew Golden out of Texas to the Vikings. I know wide receiver isn't necessarily their biggest team need, but I could see them making this move since they have, of course, Justin Jefferson as the number one wide receiver. Jordan Addison has put up some decent enough stats in his first 2 years, but I don't think has graded quite as well as you would like to see out of a former first-round wide receiver. Also dealing with a potential suspension this year. Jalen Naylor hasn't really graded all that well as a number 3 wide receiver. So I think Golden could come in and be their number 3 wide receiver, potentially move up to number 2 on the depth chart at some point as well. This would be terrible for his fantasy value because they also have TJ Hawkinson. They also have 2 good running backs. So he would not be the biggest priority in the offense, at least immediately. But I think long term, he could be a very strong option. I think the Vikings could easily be a team that has 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers in this offense. So even though it might not be the best thing for them in the short, or not the best thing for Golden in the short term, it could be long term a pretty good landing spot for him.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Like I could definitely see this happening. Like I think with, like you said, with Jefferson, Addison, TJ Hawkinson, you don't need that third wide receiver. And honestly, I think, considering his profile coming out of college, like he's probably not going to be somebody that I'd want to draft in rookie drafts, because that opportunity isn't necessarily there for him, which I think he does need right away, because I don't think he's good enough to kind of overcome that level of target competition just yet. And being a first round wide receiver, he's probably going to go top 12 or so in rookie drafts. And that's just not going to be a spot that I'll be drafting him. Even if I do rank him there, on the chance that I'm wrong and the NFL is right to spend up to get him, I tend to not believe in him or players of his profile. So I'll let somebody else in my league draft him at that cost. All right. So the Texans are up next here at 25. And I think this is a team that's going to look to replenish their offense a bit in this draft. I fully expect them to even draft a running back before the end of day 2. But in round 1, I think they add a dynamic receiver like Luther Burden the third here to give CJ Stroud another weapon in the passing game. So Tank Dell, he's a great wide receiver too when he's on the field, but he is dealing with significant injuries already in his career. And for a small wide receiver, like that could continue to be an issue. So they need someone else along with Nico Collins to get the ball to consistently. I understand, they added Christian Kirk this offseason, but that's not scaring me off drafting a first round wide receiver by any means. I think Burden is going to take over that slot role, but he can also move to the outside in those 2 wide receiver sets as needed and be effective really anywhere on the field as well, in a number of different ways, specifically as kind of a quick pass option to help Stroud get the ball out of his hands fast and cut down on those sack numbers, which was a big issue last year and contributed to that sophomore slump a bit. So I'm all for them taking a wide receiver here in round 1 and making sure that they have the weapons for that offense and for CJ Stroud.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting landing spot with Burden. Burden's ability to play both outside and in the slot, as well as Christian Kirk's ability to play on the outside and in the slot. Their new offensive coordinator, Nick Cali, came from the Rams, and the Rams are a team that likes to move around their wide receivers a bit, even though they typically have one wide receiver who tends to be in the slot more often than not. They still let the wide receivers play different spots, and I think Burden would give them that flexibility to sometimes it's Burden in the slot, sometimes it's Kirk in the slot, and whoever's not in the slot's out wide. So I think that would work just fine for their offense in the short term. Certainly complicates things once Dell is healthy, but who knows how long Christian Kirk will remain on the roster as a long-term option versus just a short-term option. I think this is a decent enough landing spot for his fantasy value, but even with Kirk there, Kirk's going to get playing time. He'll get some targets. Nico Collins, a clear number 1. They still probably want to run the ball a decent amount, so and when I'm doing my dynasty rookie rankings pre-draft, that's one of the reasons why I keep having a lot of the running backs near the top, is because we're getting to these wide receiver landing spots and where they're probably going to end up going. And they're on teams where they're going to be the second option, third option, maybe even fourth option in the offense. And I'm just going to continue that right here with the 26th pick for the Los Angeles Rams, going Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver from Ohio State. I think he can be the long-term replacement for Cooper Kupp in the offense, someone who played a ton in the slot at Ohio State. I think he's capable of playing some out wide, but there's a very real chance that if the Rams make this move, he would be the 4th wide receiver on the depth chart to start his NFL career. We saw something somewhat similar with Tutu Atwell, was a high 2nd round pick a few years ago, and he basically didn't play at all in his rookie season. I don't think that would be quite the case here. I think the Rams do a decent amount of rotating wide receivers by drive. It would allow Devontae Adams to take a drive or 2 off here and there. Tutu Atwell wouldn't necessarily be a full-time wide receiver in this case, but this would be a pretty bad spot in the short term for Egbuka's fantasy value. In the long term, we would need to know the Rams' long-term plans at quarterback to know that kind of value, but pairing him with Sean McVay for the long term, I think has the potential to be great for his fantasy value, just with how McVay has used slot receivers before and how high Cooper Kupp's ceiling was at Kupp's best. I think this has the potential long-term to be great, even though this might make him a very late draft pick in redraft leagues this year.
Yeah, I mean, as much as Devonte Adams, Puka Nakua, Emeka Buka is a pretty nasty wide receiver core from an NFL standpoint, like it's definitely crowded for fantasy. But yeah, not impossible that these guys all have value, all season long, as assuming Matthew Stafford is healthy and then chucking it as much as possible. So yeah, could be a fun spot for sure. I'm up next year, 27th overall, the Baltimore Ravens. So I went with James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. Now, Pierce, he has some off-field concerns, kind of some of that seemingly stemming from like attitude problems, it seems. So I think he's going to need, to be in a stable environment for, and coaching staff to get him on the right path. And I think Baltimore offers that for him because as a pass rusher, like Pierce is about as effective of a weapon as anyone else in this class, probably not named Abdul Carter. He ranked no worse than 95th percentile among past edge prospects in all the key pass rush metrics for his career. So pass rush grade, win rate, pressure rate, quick pressure rate. He was dominant. So he might be more of like a designated pass rusher to start his career because he doesn't necessarily have the size or the run defense chops to contribute on those early downs just yet, but that doesn't mean that, he can't get there. So the Ravens are in need of a high quality pass rusher. They have Odafe Owe, they have Kyle Van Noy, like those types, but I think Pierce can give them a more consistent pass rushing element to their defensive line and be a major factor for that defense.
There, I'm going to continue the trend of going edge defenders here. I have the 28th pick with the Detroit Lions, and I'm going to go Donovan Azuruku, edge rusher out of Boston College. With the Lions, we saw Aiden Hutchinson have an excellent 5 games, and he ended up leading their edge rushers in pressure last year because no one else could beat him over their 17 games. So I think even though we fully expect Aiden Hutchinson to be fully healthy this upcoming year, having another edge rusher across from Hutchinson would be great to see. And want to point out something that I think that's really cool that we've done at PFF that Trevor Sycamore put together was having team-specific big boards that were released yesterday, the top 100 players specific for each team. So he's someone who ranks 15th on the Lions big board because of what the Lions need and scheme fits and those kind of things. So definitely check that out if you haven't already, because that's something pretty unique that I haven't really seen anyone else do outside of PFF. So I think he would be a great fit for the Lions, and our big board agrees.
Yeah, that was really cool stuff from Trevor. And yeah, this Ezraku to the Lions, it's starting to feel likely. Like he had a really nice 2024 season. His career numbers as a whole aren't necessarily like as I guess encouraging as some of the other pass rushers in this class, but still just 21 years old as well. And like you said, there is definitely a need there next to Aiden Hutchinson as another edge rusher on this defense. So I would like the spot a fair bit for Ezraku's value.
I just want to point out when writing this article, I found a trend of like, I'm picking all the defensive guys who are supposed to get drafted early that you don't like their IDP value quite as much. And you drafted all the guys where you like their IDP value.
Yeah, I know it's impossible to kind of avoid that sometimes. I feel like where I start to let the IDP bias sink into my mock drafts a little bit, but kind of I think happens here as well with the 29th overall pick because I have the Washington Commanders drafting Nick Emenwari, safety out of South Carolina. Now, actually coming out tomorrow, I also wrote up ideal IDP landing spots for this year's rookie class, and I love the fit for Nick Emenwari in Dan Quinn's defense. Last year, Dan Quinn relied heavily on Jeremy Chin in that strong safety role. He deployed him a ton around the line of scrimmage, and he racked up a lot of production in that role. He was a consistent IDP starter for us, but I think Emenwari has an even higher ceiling in that spot. He has the ideal size, first of all, and he has the experience in that role during his time in college, played over 40% of his defensive snaps in the box for his career. Obviously, insanely athletic as well. For those that don't know, he scored a perfect 10 RAS coming out of that very impressive combine. He's my safety one in this class for IDP, and this I think would create an even bigger gap in that regard if he does go to Washington to play under Dan Quinn, who is without Jeremy Chin. He's off to Vegas and doesn't really have anyone on that roster right now that can man that strong safety role in the way that I believe Emenwari can. So I doubt that we get this lucky for IDP purposes, but a man can dream. So this is where I'm going.
There, I've got the Bills at 30 here, and I'm going to trade back. I think the Bills, they have a couple needs, but I don't think there were any players that I'm like, they need to pick him here in order to get that player. I think they can trade back into the second round and do that, or at least get a player that they're interested in. And we already made one trade with the Bears, so we're going to do another trade involving the Bears. We're going to have the Bears trade up to 30, trade away their 39 pick, as well as the 116, the pick that they got from Miami earlier in this mock draft, trading up to 30 to get running back Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. I think Henderson, whether it's the Bears or someone else, I could very well see a team trading up to around this spot in order to pick him. Looking at the draft order after this, we've got Kansas City at 31, who could very well draft a running back either here or later in the draft. Don't think the Eagles are drafting running back at 32, but after that, Cleveland Browns at 33 definitely need a running back. The Giants at 34, I don't think Tyrone Tracy is going to stop them from drafting a running back. Titans at 35, I'm not as worried about, but 36 Jaguars, they could very well use Henderson. The Raiders, if they don't draft Jahnke, the Patriots at 38 have said they want a running back who can catch the ball out of the backfield, which is Henderson. So I'm having the Bears jump ahead of all of those teams in order to get Henderson. Like we've talked about earlier with Ben Johnson, they put together an excellent offensive line over the course of free agency and trades, and the players they already had on the roster. They already have the quarterback. They already have the wide receivers. I think the final piece to really make this offense really excited for Ben Johnson will be the running back, who has a lot of similarities to Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think seeing Gibbs be a elite fantasy option these past couple years, I think Henderson in this spot can get there. And even if it's not the Bears, there's a chance that it might not be quite as good of a landing spot, but still one where Henderson is the primary back for fantasy football purposes pretty much wherever he ends up.
Yeah, this will be a fun one. I don't know that Bills fans are going to love the team trading out of the first for the second year in a row, but I do agree. Like, as far as options here, like, they can probably afford to move back, accrue some extra capital, and still get their top option in the second round potentially. I think they'll want a defensive player, but even if not, there are going to be some solid options on offense as well. Maybe a nice outside wide receiver like a Trey Harris or Jaden Higgins would be a ton of fun in Buffalo. But yeah, for the Bears, like, this would be a fun fit. Henderson as their RB1 probably makes DeAndre Swift expendable too, because Henderson can play that same role, and for cheaper, obviously. Like, if the Bears can trade DeAndre Swift post June 1st, like, they'd save a nice chunk of dough, because that offense is built for a running back like Henderson to thrive. So we just got to make sure the path is clear. So but I do like it either way. All right, so kind of closing out the first round, at least for my picks here, I have 31, the Kansas City Chiefs, and I went with guard Tyler Booker out of Alabama. So kind of a somewhat boring pick here for fantasy purposes to close things out, but one that I think we can't get all that exciting for with the Chiefs anyways. I don't think there's any necessarily like overly exciting options for them. They lost Joe Thuney to the aforementioned Chicago Bears this offseason. He was a key piece to their offensive line, so they have to do something to kind of rectify that. And I think Booker being available here, I believe our top interior offensive lineman on the PFF big board, they grab him here and try to plug that hole.
There, and I will close out the draft also going offensive lineman. I've got the Philadelphia Eagles here at 32. I'm going to go with Ray Zabel out of North Dakota State. Played tackle in college, but I think would play guard here for the Eagles. Eagles spent the offseason, rather than bringing in a bunch of free agents or anything like that, they re-signed a bunch of their guys to long-term contracts so they can continue doing what they've been doing. But one of the players they weren't able to re-sign was Mekhi Becton, who did a nice job for them at guard this past year. So I think Zabel is someone who could fill that guard spot. Currently, it's like Tyler Steen, and then they brought in Kenyon Green fighting for the guard spot. Neither of them had a PFF grade above 60 last year, and the Eagles have been known for having a great offensive line. A big reason why Saquon Barkley was able to do what he did last year is because of the offensive line for the Eagles. They work so well together. So I think in order to try keeping the offensive line as elite as it could possibly be, adding an offensive line makes a lot of sense so they can continue doing what they've been doing.
I like it, and giving some love to those FCS prospects as well. So makes sense. But yeah, that's going to wrap things up for us today. And to wrap up all of our pre-NFL draft content, because the next time we do a podcast, Nate, the NFL draft will be wrapped, landing spots and draft capital will have been solidified, and we'll be able to really start locking the takes on this year's rookie class. So I'm really excited about that. Thank you for doing this with me. It was a fun exercise for sure. But before you go, let everyone know what your content plan for the NFL draft is, and what is up on the site now.
Sure. So during the draft, I will be working on winner loser articles after each day. I will also be updating the rankings on the website. If you haven't checked the fantasy tools pages recently, we've got the rankings all up there. So I will be updating those. Then following the draft, as well as a normal winners losers article for the entire draft, I will have a ton of player profiles, aiming to have about 5 of those per day to get through the top 25 to 30 or so rookies to help you prepare for your dynasty rookie drafts as well as redrafts too. And then ranking articles of dynasty ranking, superflex, dynasty rookie, dynasty superflex rookie, as well as a dynasty trade value chart. So that'll all be coming the week after the draft. And then podcast wise, we're going to be back on Monday, not a usual time for us, to recap the draft, and then we will be on again. I think it was Thursday that we're going to aim for some dynasty rookie rankings.
Yeah, really looking forward to that. And then as for me, I've written up ideal landing spots for our offensive fantasy players, which is out now. Tomorrow, the IDP version of that is coming out. I have my pre-draft top 100 fantasy big board rankings thing for free on the site that contains IDPs in it as well, to see where I'm kind of valuing this year's rookies before the draft shakes things up a bit. So that's it for now. Enjoy the NFL draft. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.